compassion, the kindness of a Savior, the mercy for me. Everyone needs love.
First, if you just keep reading here, David seems confused by the cowardice that's all around him, doesn't he? Look at verse 25, invest it with the emotion here that it really should have. The men of Israel said, David has heard this, the men of Israel said, have you seen this man? Have you seen him? Surely he's coming up to defy Israel. It's all that he ever does. Now look at this, and it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him. Now look, with great riches, and the king will give him his own daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. In other words, he will exempt his father's family from taxes. I love David's response. 26. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, look at this. What? See, now look at this. Read it right. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Look, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God anyway? Do you see how absolutely unimaginable this whole affair was to David? You see, he's saying, what? Pay riches for defending God's name? Pay riches for defending God's people? Really? See, what David can't understand here is why there wasn't a line of guys saying, pick me. Of course, there was no line, right? And Eliab, maybe David was looking at Eliab. Do you remember him? One of the tragic characters really in Scripture. Eliab, David's oldest brother. Kind of a lesser version of Saul. Remember him? Handsome, big, impressive outwardly. Eliab heard David, and clearly you find that he's assailed by conviction for his own spiritual cowardice, and because of that, he lashes out at David. Look partway through verse 28. Look, it says, Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, why have you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence, David. I know the wickedness of your heart. You've come down here to see the battle. Take those words in. It's not hard to see why God had rejected Eliab back in chapter 16, is it? You remember that? The sons of Jesse are assembled there. Samuel's going to pick the king. He sees Eliab, big, tall, handsome, tough-looking guy. Samuel says to himself, this is the one. Remember what God said, not him, Samuel. I have rejected him. You want to know why? It's right here. It's because he's impressive outwardly, but he's a spiritual coward inwardly. David's response is classic. Look at verse 29. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? You've got to love this too. Eliab's harsh rebuke does not cause David, see this, Eliab's rebuke does not cause David to set aside his own righteous indignation over the Lord's name being defamed. There's one thing at this point in time that matters to David. Look at verse 30. Then David, look at this, turned away from Eliab. Boy, that's the thing to do when someone challenges your courage. We'll come back to that. He turned away from his brother to another and said the same thing. In other words, he said, really? Is this really what's going on? And the people answered the same thing as before. And so with that confirmation, it is so on for David. See, there's no question in David's mind at this point. The giant will die today. There's not going to be a 41st day of taunting God. Path to the giant is going to come through Saul, of course. What do we know about Saul? Well, we know that Saul should already have taken the giant out, right? Saul's been cowering like the rest of his army. Verse 31, Here's the heart of Saul. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and Saul sent for David. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him, and that is on account of Goliath. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You're not able to go fight against this Philistine, for you're but a boy, while he's been a warrior from his youth." And I love this. Look at this. Not even a pause. But, that's the adversative. He's going to argue here. David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them." Now look, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, He will deliver me also from the hand of this Philistine." Listen, let me quickly pause here and give you a great principle from the early life of David to remember. It's this, listen, God cannot be challenged. Nothing is hard for God. David understood that. And listen, the rest of that is that God will do mighty things through us when we walk in His power. And so Saul said to David, "Look at this, go, and may the Lord be with you." Next couple of verses are interesting. 38 says, "Then Saul clothed David with his garments, put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword," that is Saul's sword, "over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, 'I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them.' David took them off. Saul, remember, is head and shoulders taller than anyone in Israel. We can't say for sure what that means. Maybe he's 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". Maybe David is average in stature. Maybe he's 5'6", 5'8", something like that. We can't say for sure, but in any event, it's pretty obvious that Saul's armor is not going to fit David, right? And so what you see here is really David being polite. He politely tests the armor. In other words, he tries it on. And he says, "No thanks." And you see, the truth here is that David really wasn't interested in wearing the armor anyway, because in David's eyes, remember, you need to remember this, in David's eyes, the giant is already dead. David knew that he didn't need Saul's armor to do the job, and so he puts it aside. And again, I love the text here. Without fanfare, David goes. No hero send-off here. No indication that Israel's thousands were cheering him as he goes. Very businesslike, he just goes. Look back at your Bible, verse 40. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had. And he put the bag into his pouch, or even in his pouch it says. Now make a quick note here. This is important. We alluded to this earlier. Make the note here that there's nothing there of allegorical significance. Sometimes preachers get to that verse 40 and they go crazy with evaluating the stick and the fact that there were 5 stones and the stones were smooth and there's a pouch and a bag and all of that other stuff, and they spiritualize all of that stuff. We're not going to do that. There's nothing in these verses of allegorical significance. We said we need to understand that David's stick is his shepherd's staff. It's what he did. Remember, he was a shepherd. This is his shepherd's staff. He took it with him. He didn't know maybe he's going to need it. He chose 5 stones, and we're told that he chose for himself 5 stones. David was good with a sling. He chose these stones because he knew that they would sling well. Why did he take 5? I don't know, maybe because that's how many would fit into his bag. Why were they smooth? Well, we live by the Colorado River. What happens to rocks when they tumble in water for years and years? They become smooth. Any of you ever used a slingshot? I grew up around here all the time, had slingshots when I was a boy, tore stuff up, shot things with a slingshot. Man, you want the roundest thing that you can find to shoot out of that slingshot. Of course, the verse says his sling was in his hand. and he approached the Philistine. Get the picture? Hope you do. David here looks like an ordinary, unimpressive shepherd going to deliver his flock from an ordinary predator. Take a good look. And you'll see that that's what spiritual courage in action looks like. He's not grandstanding. He's not saying, look at me. In a workmanlike fashion, David's just going out to do his job. 41, then the Philistine came on and approached David. Now look, with the shield bearer in front of him. And so again, that's effectively 2 for 1. When the Philistine looked and saw David, now look at this, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, that is, he was but a boy, a teenage boy, and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. He disdained him for that. You think maybe the giant wasn't too attractive? Philistine said to David, now look at this, am I a dog? You know, we think well of dogs. We keep them for pets. Dogs were pests. They were hated. It was about as bad a thing as you could call someone was a dog. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? You see, he's looking at his staff. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. In other words, as James MacDonald says here, he cursed David by nothing. It's an important detail because it's a preview of what's going to come. Verse 44, the Philistine also said to David, come to me and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. And David said, don't think so. Right? Not going to happen. Look at verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. You taunt the people of God, you taunt God Himself, see? Verse 46, this is the boy king talking here. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands. See, it's a settled issue. Do you get that? And David could have stopped there, but you got to love this about David. Now David's going to preach a little. Look at the rest of 46. I will strike you down and remove your head from you. That is Jed's favorite part of the story. We'll read that, and he wants me to read that over and over again. And I would give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth. Now look, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Isn't it amazing how that's worked? You know, the outcome of this showdown reverberates still, doesn't it? Through countless cultures. 3,000 years after the fact.